Part 1. A Beautiful Young Woman. During the last part of the 18th century, there lived a man of science. One day he left his laboratory because he had found a beautiful young woman who became his wife. Almer loved his young wife very much, but his real passion was science and the mysteries of nature. One day, very soon after their marriage, Almer stared at his wife with a worried expression.
"Georgiana,"
he said,
"did you know that the mark on your cheek can be eliminated?"
No, I didn't.
she said, smiling.
People have called it a charm, and I believed it.
Perhaps on another face it could be a charm, but not on yours. No, dearest Georgiana, your beauty is almost perfect. But I hate that birthmark.
You hate it?
Exclaimed Georgiana, who started crying.
Then why did you marry me? You cannot love me if you hate my birthmark.
In the center of Georgiana's left cheek there was a strange red mark. It had the shape of a very tiny human hand. In the past, young men had liked the tiny hand. They said a fairy had put her tiny hand on her beautiful cheek. Some envious young women said that it destroyed Georgiana's beauty. Before their marriage, Almer did not think about the birthmark. But now it had become a frightening obsession. Georgiana's beauty was almost perfect, and he could not tolerate this defect. It was an imperfection of nature. It was nature's way of showing that we are only mortals. Their happiness was ruined by this birthmark. When Almer woke up in the morning and opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was Georgiana's crimson mark. When they sat together by the fire in the evening, his eyes always looked at the birthmark on Georgiana's cheek. It was the mark of her imperfection. Georgiana shuddered when Almer looked at her, and the pink color of her cheeks turned white, and the little red hand became more evident. It looked like a red ruby on a white stone. Late one night, Georgiana said,
My dear Almer, do you remember anything about a dream you had last night? A dream about this horrible little hand?
"No, I don't,"
replied Almer, who was surprised. But then he added coldly,
"Maybe I did dream about it, because before sleeping I thought about the hand."
And you dreamed about it?
continued Georgiana, who was almost crying.
It was a terrible dream. How can you forget it? How can you forget this sentence? It is in her heart now, and we must take it out. Do you remember the dream?
Almer now remembered his dream. He dreamed that he was with his servant Aminadab. He was trying to remove the red birthmark. But as his knife went deeper into the cheek, the little hand went deeper and deeper. At last the little hand caught Georgiana's heart, and Almer wanted to cut it away. When he remembered the dream clearly, Almer felt ashamed. The truth often comes out in our dreams. Until now, he did not realize that the birthmark had had a terrible influence on him.
Almer,
continued Georgiana seriously,
what can we do to eliminate this birthmark? Maybe it will cause a deformity, or perhaps the mark is as deep as life. But can we eliminate it forever?
Dearest Georgiana, I have thought about this a lot, and I am sure it can be eliminated.
Oh, then please do it. I am not afraid of the risk, because life with this birthmark is awful. Either eliminate it, or take my life. You are a great man of science. All the world knows you. I am certain that you can do it. Please save me from madness.
My dear wife,
cried Almer,
don't worry. I have thought about this problem very much. I am certain that I can make your cheek as perfect as the other. I know I can correct this error of nature, and my happiness will be great.
Then the problem is solved.
said Georgiana. Her husband kissed her right cheek, which was perfect. The next day, Almer told his wife about his plan.
We will both live in the apartment which I used as a laboratory when I was young.
He had made important discoveries in that laboratory, and he had learned about the mysteries of nature and the universe. Georgiana was frightened when Almer took her to the apartment. He looked at her happily, but the birthmark on her white cheek made him shudder, and Georgiana fainted.
"Aminadab! Aminadab!"
shouted Almer violently. A short, robust man with long hair came out of another room. This strange man had been Almer's assistant for many years. He did not understand scientific principles, but he followed instructions and did his job well.
"Georgiana has fainted! Quickly, open the door and burn a special candle,"
cried Almer.
"Yes, master,"
answered Aminadab, looking at poor Georgiana. Then he said to himself,
"He should never eliminate that birthmark."
Almer was at his wife's side when she woke up.
Where am I? Oh, I remember,
said Georgiana quietly, and she put her hand over her cheek to hide the terrible mark from her husband's eyes.
"Don't be afraid, dear Georgiana,"
he said.
"It will be a pleasure to remove it."
Oh, please do not look at it again. I can never forget that terrible shudder.
To help Georgiana forget her problem, Almer tried to entertain her. He showed her a little plant that grew slowly before her eyes. When a lovely flower appeared, Georgiana exclaimed,
"It's magic! I won't touch it."
"No, you can touch it. Pick the flower and enjoy its perfume."
But when Georgiana touched the flower, the plant died immediately, and its leaves became black. Then Almer decided to create her portrait on a piece of metal. He used a scientific process that he had invented. The result was frightening, because the portrait was difficult to see, but the birthmark was clearly visible. Almer was angry and threw the piece of metal away. He soon forgot these failures and continued studying science and making experiments. He often went to Georgiana and told her about the mysteries of science and about the history of alchemy. He told her that science could do many incredible things, and it could easily remove the little hand from her cheek. When Almer mentioned the birthmark, Georgiana was always very unhappy. Almer worked many hours in his laboratory with the help of Aminadab. One day he showed his wife a small crystal ball.
"What is this?"
asked Georgiana, looking at the small crystal ball with a gold-colored liquid.
"It is very beautiful. It looks like the potion of life."
"In one sense it is. It is the potion of immortality. It can prolong life or destroy life."
"Why do you keep such a terrible potion?"
asked Georgiana in horror.
"Oh, don't worry, dearest Georgiana,"
replied Almer.
"Look at this powerful cosmetic for the skin."
"Are you going to use it on my cheek?"
asked Georgiana.
"Oh, no. Your cheek needs something that will go deeper, much deeper."
When she looked in the mirror and saw the red birthmark, she hated it more than anything. Part 2. Perfection is Dangerous. While Almer worked in his laboratory, Georgiana looked at the books in his library. They were books by scientists, poets, and philosophers. But the most interesting work was a big book written by her husband, in which he wrote down every experiment of his scientific career. The book was the history of his intense and ambitious life. As Georgiana read it, she loved Almer more and more. She knew he was a great scientist. However, many of his experiments were failures, and this made her very sad. One day she put her face on the open book and started crying. When Almer entered the room and saw her, he said,
It is dangerous to read a wizard's books.
Now that I have read this book, I adore you more than ever,
said Georgiana.
Ah, but wait for this success,
he said,
and then adore me if you want. But now I would like to hear your beautiful voice. Please sing to me, my dearest.
So Georgiana sang, and Almer was very pleased. Then he returned to his laboratory. But Georgiana had forgotten to tell her husband about a strange sensation she had felt on her left cheek for the last 2 or 3 hours. So she entered into her husband's laboratory for the first time. The first thing she noticed was the furnace with its intense fire. All around the room there were tubes, cylinders, and other scientific instruments. The air was filled with strange vapors and odors. But what really surprised her was Almer himself. He was as pale as death and worried as he prepared a strange new potion. He was so different from the man she had seen a few moments before.
"Carefully, Aminadab, carefully!"
he cried.
"This is a very important moment."
"Oh," said Aminadab. "Look, master, look!" Almer raised his eyes quickly and became very angry when he saw Georgiana. He went to her and took her arm.
"Why did you come here? Don't you trust your husband?"
he cried angrily.
"Now go away."
No, Almer.
said Georgiana firmly.
You don't trust me, and you don't tell me your worries about this experiment. I will accept all the risks.
"No, no, Georgiana,"
said Almer impatiently.
I will drink any potion you give me. I trust you completely.
"My dear wife,"
said Almer,
"you must know that this red hand is deep inside you. There could be danger."
Danger? There is only one danger, that this horrible birthmark remains on my cheek.
cried Georgiana.
Remove it, or we will both go mad.
"Your words are very true,"
said Almer sadly.
"And now, please go back to your rooms. The potion will soon be tested."
When Georgiana returned to her rooms, she thought about Almer's noble character and his great love for her. He wanted her to be perfect because he loved her so much. Her thoughts were interrupted by Almer's footsteps. He carried a glass with a bright, colorless, transparent liquid. He was pale, but didn't seem worried or afraid.
"This potion is perfect,"
he said, looking at Georgiana.
"It cannot fail."
My dearest Almer, life has become very difficult. I think death is the best solution for me.
"But why do you speak of death? The potion cannot fail. Look at its effect on this plant."
Near the window there was an old geranium plant. Its leaves were yellow and ugly. Almer poured a small quantity of the potion in the plant. After a short time, the ugly yellow leaves became green.
I did not need any proof,
said Georgiana quietly.
I believe you. Give me the potion. I am happy to drink it.
"Drink then, my dearest wife. Soon your body will be as perfect as your spirit."
Georgiana drank the potion and gave Almer the empty glass.
It is like water from a magic fountain. Now, dearest Almer, let me sleep.
She fell asleep almost immediately. Almer sat by her side and watched her very carefully. He often looked at the birthmark on her white cheek. At first it was very visible. Then it slowly disappeared.
"It's almost gone,"
said Almer to himself.
"Success! Success! But Georgiana is so pale."
He heard his servant laugh. He too was delighted. Almer looked at Aminadab and said,
"You served me well. Heaven and earth have done their part. The experiment is a success, Aminadab!"
These exclamations disturbed Georgiana's sleep. She opened her eyes and looked in the mirror. She smiled weakly when she saw that the little red hand had almost disappeared. Then she looked at Almer. She was worried.
My poor Almer,
She said quietly.
Poor? No, I am the richest and happiest man, and you are my splendid wife. Now you are perfect.
my poor Almer.
She repeated lovingly.
You have done your best. Your intention was very noble, but now I am dying.
It was true. The fatal hand was linked to Georgiana's life. When it disappeared, Georgiana's life disappeared too, and so she died. Almer had wanted perfection, but he did not realize that perfection was not part of this world. And so he lost the woman he loved and destroyed his happiness forever.
Chapter 1. The First Americans. The Indians. The American Indians came from Asia about 40,000 years ago. They crossed the Bering Strait. Then they went down to North and South America. About 20 million Indians lived in America when the first explorers arrived. These Indians lived in many different tribes. Every tribe had a chief. The Indians and the explorers were friends. The Indians taught the explorers how to grow corn, potatoes, and tobacco. They taught them how to travel by canoe in the wilderness. The explorers brought the Indians rifles, tools, cattle, and horses. The explorers also brought illnesses. Many Indians died from these illnesses. The Indians of the plains were expert hunters. They rode fast horses. They hunted the buffalo with bows and arrows or rifles. These Indians followed the buffalo across the plains. They used the buffalo for food, clothes, and teepees. The other American Indians were farmers. They farmed, fished, and hunted small animals. These Native Americans were happy people. They were strong, healthy, and courageous. They loved and respected nature. After many years, more new settlers and explorers went to America. They wanted to go to the West. They wanted to live there. They took the land from the Indians. The Indians were very angry, and the Indian Wars started. Many people were killed. The Indians lost their land and their way of life. They went to live on reservations.
Chapter 2. Daniel Boon. Before 1803, most of America was a wilderness. There were no maps and no roads. Daniel Boon was a famous explorer and pioneer. In 1769, he traveled across the Appalachian Mountains to Kentucky. He opened the road to the West. Daniel Boon and his family built a cabin and a fort in Kentucky. Boon had many adventures with the Indians. The Indians captured and killed 2 of his sons. In 1778, Boon was captured by the Shawnee Indians. He was their prisoner, but these Indians respected him. He was a strong fighter and a courageous man. Boon helped the pioneers. His fort protected settlers during Indian attacks. Boon was an American free spirit. He loved freedom and adventure. In 1799, he went to Missouri. He said to his friends,
"There are too many people here. I'm going to the West."
America grew very quickly. Johnny Appleseed was another American pioneer. In the 1800s, he planted apple trees on the frontier. He helped the settlers in Ohio and Indiana.
Chapter 3. The Lewis and Clark Expedition. In 1803, the United States President, Thomas Jefferson, bought the Louisiana Territory from France. He paid $15 million for this immense piece of land. President Jefferson liked science. It was very interesting. He wanted to learn about the plants and animals of the new territory. In May 1804, President Jefferson asked Meriwether Lewis and William Clark to explore the Louisiana Purchase. Lewis and Clark were the first white men to see this land. This important expedition began in St. Louis, Missouri. About 50 men traveled up the Missouri River. They explored the territory and made maps. After 6 months, they stopped and built Fort Mandan. They spent the long winter there. In the spring of 1805, the expedition continued. An Indian woman called Sacagawea went on the expedition with the explorers. She was a friendly Shoshone Indian. Sacagawea spoke English and other Indian languages. She was very helpful. Sacagawea's brother was a Shoshone chief. A Shoshone guide helped the explorers cross the high mountains. The journey was difficult and dangerous. Grizzly bears and other animals attacked the explorers. The explorers built canoes. They traveled down the Columbia River to the Pacific Ocean. They arrived at the Pacific Ocean in November 1805. They built a fort there. The expedition returned to Missouri in September 1806. The explorers traveled 8,000 miles, 12,800 kilometers, from May 1804 to September 1806. The Lewis and Clark expedition was very successful. Lewis and Clark made many maps. They brought back a lot of information about the West. In the 1840s, John Fremont and Kit Carson explored the land between the Rocky Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. They visited California and Oregon. Fremont made the first scientific map of the West. Another important pioneer was Davy Crockett. He fought for the independence of Texas. This was the beginning of the great movement to the West.
Chapter 4. Let's Go West. After the Lewis and Clark expedition, settlers, gold prospectors, and trappers went to the West. The American frontier was immense. Settlers wanted to build homes and farms in the West. They wanted a better life. Gold prospectors wanted to find gold and become rich. Trappers wanted to hunt wild animals. This was an exciting period. In 1841, thousands of pioneers began their long journey. They started in Independence, Missouri. From there, they took the Oregon Trail or the Santa Fe Trail. They traveled for 4 to 6 months. Most journeys began in the spring. The pioneers wanted to arrive before winter. The pioneers traveled in covered wagons pulled by mules or oxen. They put food, clothes, furniture, and other things in the covered wagon. A lot of families took cattle and sheep. Many covered wagons traveled together. This was called a wagon train. All the wagon trains had a leader called a captain. They also had a scout. The scout knew the trail well. He walked in front of the others to look for Indians or other dangers. The journey was long, difficult, and dangerous. It was difficult to cross big rivers and tall mountains. The weather was another problem. In the summer, it was very hot. There was little water to drink. There was little grass for the animals to eat. Rain and snow were also a problem. About 10,000 people died on the Oregon Trail between 1835 and 1845. The Indians killed only 400 people.
Chapter 5. Life on the Frontier. When the settlers arrived at their destination, they began to work. They began to build a home and plant crops. The home was usually made of logs. It was called a log cabin. It was a small home with 1 or 2 rooms. The settlers made the furniture. They used logs to make tables, chairs, and beds. Men, women, and children planted crops. Corn and wheat were important crops. The settlers ate a lot of corn. The men hunted buffalo and other animals. Men, women, and children worked all day. There was little free time. There were no shops on the frontier. The settlers bought some things from Fort Laramie and Fort Bridger. Some women brought a spinning wheel to the frontier. These women made yarn. They used yarn to make clothes. Illness was a big danger on the frontier. There were no hospitals, few doctors, and very little medicine. Many people died at a young age. Most settlers lived far from churches. When they wanted to get married, they waited for the circuit rider. The circuit rider was a religious man. He traveled on the frontier. Settlers often waited months for the circuit rider. Who were the frontier people? The frontier people came from the east, the south, and the Indiana Territory. They also came from Europe, Scandinavia, and China. Most settlers were honest people, but some were outlaws. Some of them wanted excitement and adventure. Frontier people were strong and courageous. They loved the freedom and adventure of the frontier. They were true American free spirits. Villages and towns began to grow on the frontier. Some became important cities.
Chapter 6. The California Gold Rush. In 1848, John Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's Fort in California. This western territory became famous. Thousands of people traveled to California to look for gold. This was the California Gold Rush. These people were called 49ers. The first 49ers arrived in San Francisco in February 1849 on the steamship California. Others came to California on the Oregon and California Trail. In 1849, almost 100,000 people arrived in California to look for gold. San Francisco became a very important city. There were many small mining towns in the California gold country. Many 49ers found gold, but only some of them became rich and important. The discovery of gold changed the destiny of California and the West. The population of California grew very quickly. It became the 31st state of the United States in 1850. A lot of people traveled to the West. A lot of gold traveled from California to the East. From 1852, the Wells Fargo stagecoaches traveled from the East Coast to the West Coast. Wells Fargo was a very important company in the West. The stagecoaches carried passengers, money, mail, and gold across the continent. A journey across America by stagecoach was a great adventure. 4 or 6 horses pulled the Wells Fargo stagecoaches. There were 4 to 6 passengers in every stagecoach. The journey was very uncomfortable. The stagecoaches traveled all day and all night. Passengers slept inside the coaches on hard seats. Indians and outlaws attacked the stagecoaches.
Chapter 7. The Indian Wars. The Indian Wars began in the 1800s. Thousands of pioneers went to the West. They took the Indians' land. The Indians were angry. They did not want to lose their land. The Wars of the Midwest. In 1811, the Shawnee Indians of the Indiana Territory attacked the settlers and the U.S. Army. These Indian Wars continued until 1832. The Black Hawk War was the last Indian war in the Midwest. The Indians lost this war and their land. The Wars of the Southeast. In the 1830s, Osceola was the chief of the Seminole Indians of Florida. He said,
We will fight until the last drop of Seminole blood.
The Seminole Indians did not want to leave their land. They fought for many years. In 1837, Chief Osceola was captured. Most of the Seminoles were killed. The Cherokee Indians were a strong and important tribe. They had big plantations and farms. The settlers wanted their land. In 1839, the U.S. government told the Cherokees to leave their homes. They went to an Indian reservation in Oklahoma. Many Indians died during the long journey. The journey was called the Trail of Tears. The Wars of the Great Plains. In the 1850s, many pioneers crossed the Great Plains. Many of them settled there. The Sioux and Cheyenne Indians fought against these settlers. The Sioux and Cheyenne Indians were courageous warriors. The Sioux chiefs were Crazy Horse, Red Cloud, and Sitting Bull. They told their warriors, "Fight to kill, or you will lose your lands." The Sioux and Cheyenne Indians attacked U.S. Army forts and settlers. The fighting was terrible. It continued for many years. The U.S. government told the Indians to go to an Indian reservation. Chiefs Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull did not want to go. There were a lot of brutal battles. Many people were killed. The Apache and Comanche Indians also fought against the U.S. Army and the settlers for many years. The Apaches were great warriors. They loved their land and their freedom. They didn't want to lose them. They preferred to fight and die. Geronimo and Cochise were famous Apache chiefs. Their courage was legendary. Everyone was afraid of Geronimo and Cochise. The Indian Wars ended in 1890.